In 1987, 5 children entered their elementary school one October morning and were never seen again. Security cameras showed them walking through the main doors. Their books and jackets were found neatly stored in their lockers. But by the afternoon, their desks sat empty, and an entire classroom door was locked from the inside. When the janitor finally forced it open, the room was empty. The only trace left behind, 5 handprints smeared across the chalkboard. Pressed so hard the skin left faint impressions. For 35 years, parents, detectives, and an entire community have been haunted by one question: what happened inside the locked classroom? If you're drawn to chilling unsolved mysteries and want to follow us deeper into the story, subscribe now. October 12, 1987. Ravenwood Elementary School, Maryland. The morning bell echoed to the hallways of Ravenwood Elementary, bouncing off brick walls and metal lockers polished smooth by decades of children's hands. It was a cool Monday morning, the kind of day where frosts linger on the grass, and parents hustle their children inside with reminders to keep their coats zipped. Mrs. Karen Willoughby, the secretary, sat behind the front desk with her thermos of coffee, watching the stream of children file in. Among them were 5 friends: Anna Martinez, 9, Jacob Jake Leland, 10, sisters Molly and Ruth Harper, 8 and 11, and Brian Carter, 10. They moved as a pack, laughing, shoving each other with the careless energy of children who believed the world was safe. At 8:02 a.m., a camera above the entrance recorded them walking into the building. That was the last confirmed sighting. By 8:15, their coats hung neatly in lockers. Their notebooks, colored pencils, and homework assignments were stacked inside. But when roll call came, 5 names hung in the air unanswered. At first, teachers assumed they were late or skipping in mischief. But by lunch, whispers had spread. By recess, police cars lined the curb. By dismissal, parents were sobbing in the principal's office. The janitor, Robert Hale, swore he had heard giggles and footsteps behind the door of room 6B, a classroom in use since a fire damaged its ceiling beams 3 years earlier. The district had padlocked it, waiting on funds for renovation, but Hale insisted he heard children inside. At 5:30 p.m., detectives forced the door open. Inside, the air was heavy with dust. Desks stacked in the corner. The faint odor of charred wood lingered. No children, no signs of forced entry. Only the chalkboard, 5 small handprints pressed hard into the dusty surface, streaked downward as if dragged by invisible arms. They were never seen again. Chapter 1. The Return. October 2022. Ravenwood, Maryland. The school stood like a mausoleum at the edge of town, its windows boarded, its playground rusted and overgrown with weeds. Ravenwood Elementary had closed in the late 1990s, a casualty of dwindling enrollment and a legacy too haunted to erase. But on this October morning, 35 years to the day after the disappearances, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled into the cracked parking lot. Detective Claire Whitfield stepped out, pulling her coat tight against the chill. She was 42 now, sharp-eyed, her hair streaked with silver, and her career had been shaped by one unsolved mystery, the case of the Ravenwood 5. She had been 7 years old in 1987, a student at Ravenwood herself. She still remembered the day the police came, the hushed silence in the cafeteria, the way her classmates whispered the missing children's names like a chant. Claire had spent her adult life chasing shadows, cold cases, missing persons, families left in limbo, but none cut as deep as this one. The county had recently approved the school for demolition, and contractors had begun preliminary inspections. 2 days ago, one of them, an electrician, called the sheriff's office shaken. He had entered room 6B. The chalkboard was still there, and on it, faint but unmistakable, were 5 new handprints, fresh, smaller than his own. Claire unlocked the rusted side door with a key provided by the county. The smell of mildew and char hit her immediately. She clicked on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim hallways, past faded murals of smiling apples and multiplication tables. Her boots echoed in the silence. Every corner of the building seemed to breathe with memory. The painted cinder blocks, the old trophy cases, the empty bulletin boards curling at the edges. She found 6B at the end of the second-floor hallway, the same door Hale had sworn was locked that day. The padlock hung open now, broken years ago by trespassing teenagers. She pushed inside. The room smelled faintly of smoke even after all these years. The floor was dusty, the desk shoved into corners. Her flashlight swept the blackboard. What had once been black was now a faded gray-green, and there, streaked across it, 5 handprints. Claire stepped closer, her chest tightening. They were smeared downward, faint drag marks trailing off. But something chilled her even more. These weren't the same prints preserved in photos from 1987. She had studied those 100 times in case files. These were newer. The streaks cut across dust that had only settled recently. Someone or something had touched this board again. A sound made her whip around. The faint creak of a desk shifting. The room was empty. Her radio crackled. "Whitfield, you copy? You inside?" She pressed her shoulder mic, forcing calm into her voice. "Yeah, room 6B. You're not going to believe this." She turned back to the board. The prints seemed clearer now, as though they deepened while she looked. Claire's throat went dry. 5 kids went in here, she whispered to herself. Where the hell did they go? And for the first time in years, she felt like the classroom itself was watching her. The Ravenwood Sheriff's Department was housed in a squat brick building across from the town square, its flag flapping weakly in the autumn wind. Detective Claire Whitfield sat in the small conference room with a stack of old case files spread before her. Coffee steamed in a styrofoam cup at her elbow, but she hadn't touched it. On the table lay a photocopied black and white image of the original chalkboard from 1987. 5 prints, small and raw, against the dark slate. Claire had studied them for years. They were smeared, but the outlines of fingers, the size of palms. They had been preserved well enough for every detective on a case to obsess over. She had measured them once, tracing the span of fingers against photographs of the missing kids. They matched too neatly to be ignored. Now, 35 years later, she had seen them again, not faded relics, not scratches preserved by time. New marks, fresh dust disturbed. She rubbed her temples. A rational explanation must exist. Teenagers, squatters, vandals. The school was unlocked half the time. And yet, the prints had been small, too small for teenagers. She thought about the sound she'd heard, that faint creak of a desk shifting, the way the room seemed to hold its breath. Across the table, Sheriff Dale McKinney leaned back in his chair, his large frame barely fitting in the seat. He was 63, his hair white and thinning, his face weathered by decades in uniform. He'd been a rookie deputy in '87, barely 28. Ravenwood was his first assignment. "I'll never forget that day," McKinney said quietly, his eyes on the photo. You could feel the whole town change. One morning, we were a sleepy county seat with a couple of bar fights and stolen bikes. That afternoon, it was like the ground gave way beneath us. Claire knew his story well. He'd been one of the first to walk into room 6B after Hale broke the padlock. He said he still dreamed about the smell, the silence, the handprints. "I went back today," Claire told him, her voice low. "The prints are there again. Fresh." McKinney's eyes narrowed. "You're certain?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly, leaning forward, hands clasped on the table. "Then we've got a problem." They both knew Ravenwood. Rumors never died here. They multiplied. Whispers of satanic cults, haunted classrooms, secret tunnels. The missing 5 had been woven into every ghost story in the county. If word spread that new evidence had appeared, hysteria would follow. "Keep it quiet for now," McKinney said. "We'll send in a forensics team tomorrow. See what they can lift." Claire nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. Dust didn't hold fingerprints like clay. Whatever was there might already be too faint to capture. She gathered the old files into a neat pile. Each folder bore a child's name. She paused at Anna Martinez. Bright smile, gap-toothed grin. Claire remembered her most vividly. Anna had lived 2 streets over, her laughter often echoing across the playground. 5 children gone. No bodies, no ransom notes, no evidence of abduction. Just vanished. She rose, pushing back her chair. "I'll head home. Be back first thing." McKinney nodded, his eyes still locked on the handprints. The drive to Claire's house took her past the neighborhoods where the missing children had once lived. Time had softened the edges. New paint on old siding, different cars in the driveways. But some houses bore the weight of history. Faded curtains, neglected gardens, owners who never recovered. She slowed at the Harper residence, a small two-story with peeling shutters. Ruth and Molly's parents had moved years ago, unable to bear the memories. Now the house sat empty, weeds choking the yard. Next was the Leland place, where Jacob's mother had clung to hope until her death. Claire remembered the candlelight vigils, the photographs taped to lamp posts. The Carters and the Martinez family had eventually moved away, unable to live in the town that had swallowed their children. Claire parked outside her small craftsman bungalow. The air was crisp, stars piercing the clear night. She lingered in the car, staring at her own reflection in the rear-view mirror. Her eyes looked tired, shadowed. She thought of the children's faces, smiling, trusting, stepping into a school they never left. She entered her house, locked the door, and tossed her keys on the counter. Her cat, a gray tabby named Simon, wound around her ankles, meowing softly. She crouched to scratch behind his ears, grateful for the grounding presence. In her bedroom, she pulled out a shoebox from under the bed. Inside were clippings, photos, and notes, her personal archive of the Ravenwood Five. She had started collecting them as a teenager, driven by the unresolved mystery that had shaped her childhood. She sifted through the photos again, the group picture from the school carnival, the newspaper headline, 5 children missing, town in shock. Her phone buzzed. A text, unknown number. You saw them today, didn't you? In room 6B. Her blood ran cold. She typed quickly, "Who is this?" No response. She stared at the screen, heart hammering. Then another message appeared. They're not gone. They're waiting. Claire's throat tightened. She locked her phone, tossed it on the bed, and drew a long, shaky breath. It had to be a prank. Someone knew her history, her obsession. Kids hacked numbers all the time. But how could they know she had been inside 6B just hours ago? Sleep didn't come easily. She tossed, replaying the sound of that creak, the prints, the message. At last, exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of the chalkboard, 5 hands pressing, dragging downward. Only this time, she saw their faces reflected in the dusty slate. Anna, Jacob, Ruth, Molly, Brian, their mouths open in silent screams. She woke at 3:12 a.m., drenched in sweat. Simon sat at the foot of the bed, his fur bristled, ears pinned back. He was staring toward the dark hallway. Claire reached for her flashlight, heart pounding. The house was silent, but faintly she thought she heard something, a soft scrape, like chalk against the board. Morning light spilled weakly through Claire's blinds, striping her walls with pale gold. She hadn't slept after the sound in the night. Every creak of her old house had set her nerves on edge. When the alarm finally rang, she welcomed the distraction. She dressed quickly, black slacks and a pressed shirt, her detective shield clipped to her belt. Simon meowed, watching from the kitchen counter as she poured kibble into his dish. She envied his simplicity. His entire world measured in meals, naps, and warm patches of sun. The sheriff's department hummed with a subdued energy when she arrived. Word of her late-night text had stayed with her, though she hadn't told McKinney. Not yet. Inside the evidence room, a forensics team prepared their kits. They would head to Ravenwood Elementary to examine the prints. Claire joined them, climbing into the county van as McKinney followed in his cruiser. The school loomed in the crisp daylight, more decayed than it had seemed the night before. Boards over the windows, paint peeled from the bricks. Grass grew high against the walls. An entire generation had passed since its doors closed, but the place still breathed with memory. Inside, the air felt colder. Dust motes floated in her flashlight beam. The group moved silently, boots echoing down the empty corridor. Room 6B waited. The forensics team set to work, cameras flashing, brushes sweeping the chalkboard delicately. Claire stood back, her arms folded, watching every motion. "Anything?" she asked after 20 minutes. One tech shook his head. "Dust composition's odd. It's not decades old. Looks disturbed within the last few weeks." Another added, "The oils and the smears don't read like fingerprints. Almost too faint, like the hands weren't flesh." Claire frowned. "Meaning?" He shrugged. "Could be gloves. Could be someone wiped after. But it doesn't read like a kid's sweaty palm." They dusted for prints elsewhere in the room. Desks, doorknob, window sills. Nothing clear, just layers of grime. McKinney leaned against the doorframe, his bulk filling the space. "So we're back to nothing." "Not nothing," Claire said, her eyes on the board. "Someone came in here recently, and they wanted us to notice." That afternoon, Claire drove to the county archive. The building sat beside the courthouse, its marble columns imposing against the sky. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and floor polish. Rows of steel cabinets stretched into the gloom. She signed in and requested the Ravenwood Elementary maintenance records. A clerk wheeled them out, yellowing folders stacked high, labeled in fading marker. Claire sifted through water damage reports, fire inspections, asbestos warnings. Then she found it. Room 6B, fire incident 1984. The file detailed a small blaze in the ceiling above 6B, sparked by faulty wiring. No injuries. The room was closed for repairs, but never reopened. Budget cuts, shifting enrollments. Still, why hadn't they finished the work? At the bottom of the folder, a handwritten note from the janitor. "Robert Hale, smell lingers. Kids say they hear scratching inside. I keep the door locked tight. Best leave it alone until the board decides." Claire's pulse quickened. Scratching. Kids. She turned to the microfilm reader, loading old reels of the Ravenwood Gazette. Headlines leapt out at her. 1987. 5 students vanish without a trace. Parents demand answers as search expands. Room 6B. Town's haunted heart. Editorials speculated wildly. Some blamed cult activity. Others pointed to staff misconduct. Rumors of satanic panic swept the county that fall, fueled by whispers of rituals and sacrifices, but none of it had led to truth. Claire printed copies of the most relevant articles and slipped them into her folder. At dusk, she parked outside a weather ranch house on the outskirts of town. The nameplate by the door still read Hale. Robert Hale was 80 now, retired, his memory fading. But he was the last living adult who had stood inside 6B the day it was opened. He answered slowly, leaning on a cane. His frame had shrunk, but his eyes still carried a weary sharpness. "Detective Whitfield," he rasped. "Knew you'd come eventually." "You remember me?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. Little Claire, 2nd grade, always carried too many books. A chill slid down her spine. She hadn't realized he'd known her back then. They sat in his living room, surrounded by knickknacks and faded family photos. The television hummed quietly, but Hale muted it. "You're here about the kids?" he said. Not a question. "Yes." He leaned back, his cane across his knees. "I told them what I heard. No one listened. They never listened." "What did you hear?" He rubbed his temple as if steadying memory. Voices. Laughter like recess, but faint, muffled, coming from 6B. "I swear it, but the room was locked, padlocked, boarded. Didn't matter. I still heard them." Claire leaned forward. "When they opened it that day, what did you see?" His eyes grew glassy. "Nothing but those prints. But I felt something. Cold, heavy, like the air itself wanted me out." They sat in silence for a moment, the ticking clock filling the space. Hale's voice dropped. "You know the truth, don't you? They never left that room." "Not really." Claire swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "They're still in there, waiting." Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Another text from the unknown number. "Did he tell you?" Did Hale finally admit it? Claire's breath caught. She hadn't told anyone she was meeting Hale. "Detective?" Hale asked, watching her face pale. Claire forced her voice steady. "Nothing, just work." She rose, shaking his hand. "Thank you for your time." But as she left, her stomach twisted with dread. Someone was watching every move she made. That night, she couldn't resist returning to the school. The sun had set, the sky bruised purple. Her flashlight beam carved through the darkness as she stepped inside. The hallways were colder now, almost unnaturally so. She climbed the stairs, each step groaning. Room 6B's door loomed. She hesitated, then pushed it open. The chalkboard gleamed faintly in the flashlight's glow. The handprint still marked it, clear as ever. But something was different. A new line of chalk, faint and crooked, stretched across the board beneath the prints. Words scrawled by a trembling hand. We're still here. The next morning, Claire arrived at the sheriff's office earlier than usual. A pale fog hung low over Ravenwood, swallowing the courthouse steps and drifting across the square. The town looked like it hadn't woken yet, its storefronts shuttered, its sidewalks empty. On her desk lay the fresh case file, Ravenwood 5, 2022 reopening. Sheriff McKinney had stamped it reluctantly. Don't make promises, he told her. These families have lived with ghosts long enough. But promises weren't what drove Claire. It was a weight of 35 years, the quiet injustice of children forgotten to rumor and dust. She started with the Carters. Brian's parents had left town in 1990, but his older brother Daniel had returned recently. He lived alone in a small house near the river, a mechanic by trade. When she knocked, the door opened cautiously. Daniel Carter was in his late 40s now, his hair receding, his eyes shadowed. He studied Claire for a long moment before stepping aside. "Detective Whitfield," he said. His voice was low, wary. "You've got his eyes, Brian's. Big, round, always looking at the world like it was brighter than it really was." Claire followed him into the kitchen. The table was neat but worn, a single mug resting by the sink. Daniel poured coffee into it, then poured a second and handed it to her. "I heard you reopened the case," he said. "Why now?" "We found something," she answered carefully. "In room 6B. His hand tightened on the mug. "Don't tell me about that damn classroom." "Why not?" He stared into the steam rising from his coffee. "Because that's all anyone ever wanted to talk about. Not Brian, not his laugh, not how he could build model cars for hours and never get bored. Just the classroom, like the room swallowed him. Not the people who were supposed to keep him safe." Claire softened her tone. "Do you believe the school was hiding something?" Daniel looked up, his eyes sharp. "I believe somebody was. Teachers, administrators, maybe even the cops back then. You don't lose 5 kids in broad daylight without someone knowing more than they said." Claire noted the anger in his voice, the kind that calcified into suspicion over decades. "Do you remember anything unusual before that day?" she asked. He hesitated. "Brian said something the night before. He was nervous, but he wouldn't tell me why. Just said he didn't want to go to school Monday. I told him he was being dramatic." He swallowed hard, guilt flashing across his face. "That was the last thing I said to him." Claire reached across the table, resting her hand briefly on his. Daniel pulled away, shaking his head. "You find whoever did this. Don't let them hide behind that chalkboard forever." By afternoon, Claire stood outside a small brick bungalow with overgrown hedges, the Martinez home. Anna's mother, Elena, had never left Ravenwood. She was in her 70s now, her back bent, her hair silver. Elena welcomed Claire with a tired smile, her eyes lined from years of grief. Photographs filled every wall. Anna at a birthday party, Anna holding a puppy, Anna in her school uniform. Time had frozen her at 9 years old. "Detective," Elena said softly, pouring tea into delicate cups. "I always knew you'd come." Claire sat across from her, the steam curling between them. "You knew my mother," Elena said. "She used to say justice is a river. It might get dammed, but it always finds a way to flow again." Claire hesitated. "We found new writing in room 6B. It said, 'We're still here.'" Elena's hands trembled around her teacup. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't break. "I hear her sometimes," Elena whispered. "Anna, in the house, laughing, running down the hall. I tell myself it's memory. But what if it isn't?" Her eyes lifted to Claire's. "Promise me you'll look at the teachers again, especially Mrs. Langley." Claire frowned. "Her homeroom teacher?" Elena nodded. Anna used to say Mrs. Langley watched her too closely, that she asked her to stay after class. I reported it once. They told me I was imagining things. A chill prickled Claire's skin. She scribbled the name in her notebook. Do you still believe she's alive? Claire asked gently. Elena's eyes hardened. I don't just believe it. I know it. A mother feels it. My daughter never left me. The Harper sisters' family had left years ago. Their house abandoned, windows boarded. But neighbors remember them well. Ruth, serious and protective. Molly, shy but quick to laugh. Claire walked the overgrown path to the porch, the boards creaking beneath her. She peered through a crack in the plywood. Inside, the wallpaper peeled. The floors warped. A home hollowed out by grief. Something on the door caught her eye, scratched faintly into the wood, almost invisible. 6B. Her chest tightened. She traced the marks with her fingertip, wondering who had carved them. That evening, Claire returned to her office. On her desk lay an envelope with no return address, her name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single photograph, the chalkboard in room 6B, 5 handprints, and beneath them, new words scrawled in chalk. Do you remember us? Claire's pulse raced. She grabbed her phone, scrolling to the unknown number that had texted her. She typed, Who are you? How are you watching me? No reply, but as she set the phone down, it buzzed again. A message accompanied by an image. This time, not the chalkboard. A photo of her own house. The porch light glowing in the dark. We see you, too. The county retirement home sat on a hill overlooking the river, its white walls faded, its corridors smelling of antiseptic and old flowers. Claire signed in at the desk, her badge drawing quick glances from the staff. She asked for Margaret Langley, the former Ravenwood teacher. An aide led her down a quiet hallway, to a small room. Inside, Margaret Langley sat in a rocking chair by the window, a knitted blanket draped over her knees. Her hair, once a proud auburn, was thin and white, yet her eyes were still sharp, glinting like glass in the late afternoon sun. Detective Whitfield, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I wondered how long it would take you. Claire blinked. You know who I am? Langley smiled faintly. You were a student, not in my class, but I remember faces. You used to walk to school with your lunchbox swinging at your side. Claire swallowed. Even after decades, the teacher's memory startled her. I'm here about the Harper sisters, Anna Martinez, Brian Carter, and Jacob Leland. Claire said carefully, You were their teacher, weren't you? Langley nodded. 4th grade. They sat in the second row, always whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't looking. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Bright children, but restless. Always wandering the halls when they shouldn't. Wandering. Claire pressed. Langley's lips thinned. They had curiosity about room 6B. Children always do. The forbidden place. The closed door. They asked questions. They lingered after class. I warned them, but children rarely listen. Claire leaned forward. Warned them about what? Langley's voice lowered. That some doors are locked for a reason. Silence hung heavy. Claire's pulse quickened. What did you know, Mrs. Langley? The old teacher studied her, eyes glittering. I knew the board never told us everything about that fire. They said it was wiring, but children whispered of shadows moving in the glass, of voices when the hall was empty. I told the principal. He told me to hush. Principal who? Mr. Barrow. He's dead now. Heart attack in 92. But he knew more than he ever admitted. Always kept the key to 6B in his desk drawer. Touched it too often, as if checking it was still there. Claire's mind raced. Did you ever go inside? Langley's hand tightened on the blanket. Once, before it was locked. I smelled the smoke. I saw the scorched ceiling. And I heard... She broke off, her face paling. You heard what? Her lips trembled, scratching from the walls, like something alive was trapped inside them. Claire felt a chill crawl down her arms. And you think the children? Langley cut her off. I don't think. I know. They went looking for answers, and they found something that wanted them. The room was silent, except for the ticking clock. Finally, Claire stood. Thank you, Mrs. Langley. Langley's eyes followed her to the door. Detective. Claire paused. Langley's voice was a whisper. Don't stay in there after dark. Back at the department, Claire pulled up the old personnel files. Principal Edward Barrow's records were thin. Graduate of Towson University, hired at Ravenwood in 1971, retired abruptly in 1989, 2 years after the disappearances. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, age 54. Too young, too sudden. She dug further, requesting archive correspondence. Buried among letters of parents and board reports, she found a memo dated October 1984, just weeks after the fire in Room 6B. All faculty are advised that Room 6B is off limits until further notice. Please redirect student curiosity. Repairs will not be discussed outside official meetings. This matter is closed. Signed, E. Barrow. Her fingers tighten around the page. Not until repairs are finished. Not pending budget approval. Just closed. She scanned other memos. Most were mundane, about lunch schedules and PDA meetings. But in March 1985, another stood out. Staff should not entertain discussion of superstitions. Children must not be encouraged in rumors about the building. Silence is the best response. Remember your contracts. Claire leaned back, heart thudding. Silence. Contracts. A principal more concerned with control than clarity. That night, she drove past the school again. The fog had thickened, the building barely visible through the haze. She parked and sat for a long time, headlights off, staring at the dark outline of Room 6B's windows on the second floor. Something about Langley's words clung to her. Don't stay in there after dark. Her phone buzzed. A text. Barrow never told you what he saw on the walls, did he? She typed fast. Who are you? Stop watching me. The reply came instantly. We've been waiting longer than you've been alive. Claire's breath caught. Her hands trembled on the wheel. She looked back at the school. For a split second, she swore she saw a flicker of movement behind the boards, a shadow crossing the window of 6B. But when she blinked, the glass was empty again. The following morning, she met McKinney in his office. The sheriff looked tired, dark circles beneath his eyes. He motioned for her to sit. You've stirred up the hornet's nest, Claire, he said. Got families calling, neighbors whispering. People say the school should have been bulldozed years ago. Maybe it should have, she admitted. But then we have lost the only place the truth might still live. McKinney rubbed his temples. And what truth is that? She slid the memos across his desk. Barrow knew something. He silenced teachers, kept the key to 6B like it was more than just a door. And Langley told me she heard scratching inside the walls. McKinney stared at the papers, his jaw set. Rumors. Oh, ghosts. No, Claire said firmly. Not rumors. Warnings. Her voice lowered. And someone out there knows it. They're texting me. They're sending photos. They're inside this investigation before we are. McKinney's eyes sharpened. What do you mean, texting you? Claire hesitated. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but hiding it was dangerous now. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the messages. We're still here. Do you remember us? We see you, too. The sheriff's face hardened as he read. Get your number changed, he ordered. It won't matter, Claire said quietly. Whoever they are, they're too close. They know where I've been, who I've spoken to. They want me to keep digging. And you? McKinney asked. Claire looked him dead in the eye. I want to know what's behind that classroom wall. The locksmith arrived just after sunrise. His van rattled into the cracked parking lot of Ravenwood Elementary. A faded logo painted across the side. Claire stood waiting near the entrance, her breath clouding in the cold air. Sheriff McKinney had approved her request for access, though reluctantly. The locksmith, a wiry man in his 50s, introduced himself as Carl. He carried a heavy case of tools, his boots crunching on gravel as he followed Claire inside. You said this place was sealed tight, he asked, his voice echoing an empty hall. Padlocked for 35 years, Claire replied. Carl gave a low whistle. Then whatever's behind it has been waiting a long time. They reached Room 6B. The padlock was rusted, its metal swollen from decades of damp air. Carl knelt, fitting his picks with practiced ease. Within 2 minutes, the lock clicked open. He handed it to Claire. "Door's yours, detective." Her pulse quickened as she pushed the door inward. The smell hit her first, dust and rot, like old wood left in the cellar. The chalkboard loomed, the handprints faint in the dim morning light. Beneath them, the words still stretched. "We're still here." Carl frowned. "Kid's been in here recently?" Claire shook her head. Too clean, too deliberate. She directed him to the wall behind the chalkboard. Decades of files suggested wire and repairs had been done there, yet no one had ever followed up. Carl tapped along the plaster, listening, his knuckles rapping hollow at one point. He nodded. "There's space behind this. A crawl space could be, maybe just bad framing. Want me to cut?" Claire hesitated. Something about Langley's warning echoed in her mind. Don't stay in there after dark. But it wasn't dark now. It was morning. Sunlight stretching through the cracks in the boarded windows. "Yes," she said. "Cut it." Carl returned to his van, then reappeared with small rotary saw. The blade screeched as it chewed through plaster. Dust billowed, coating the air. Claire covered her mouth, watching intently. When the blade stopped, Carl pried away a square wall. Behind it yawned darkness, a cavity deeper than she expected. He shone his flashlight inside. There's a void bigger than a crawl space, like they walled off a whole section. Claire crouched, peering in. The beam illuminated rough brick and timber beams coated in soot. The smell of burnwood lingered. She swallowed hard. "Help me in." Carl steadied the opening as Claire squeezed through. She landed on uneven boards, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The space stretched like a forgotten attic, running parallel to the classroom. The charred ceiling bore the scars of the old fire, and scattered across the floor lay objects. Claire's breath caught. A child's shoe, scuffed and faded red. A plastic lunchbox with a cracked lid. A spiral notebook. Its cover torn, pages curling with age. Her hand trembled as she lifted the lunchbox. Across the front was a peeling sticker, rainbow bright, Anna Martinez's favorite character. She opened it. Inside were crumbs long fossilized and a folded note. She unfolded it carefully. The paper brittle. "Don't go in the walls. It's watching us." Her stomach clenched. She scanned the rest of the space. More remnants dotted the floor. Pencils, a coin purse, a broken hair clip. All belonging to children. Her flashlight beam landed on the far wall. Scratches gouged into the wood. Not random, letters. Words carved by desperate hands. "Let us out." "We're still here." It's inside the walls. Claire staggered back, bile rising in her throat. The words repeated layer over layer, like children had scratched them year after year. Behind her, Carl's voice trembled. "Detective, look." He aimed his flashlight higher. A faint outline marred the soot-stained bricks. 5 small handprints pressed into the blackened surface. Not drawn, not chalk. Imprints burned into the wall itself. Claire's pulse thundered. "Get out," she whispered. "Now." They scrambled back through the opening, coughing in the dust. Carl slammed the cut section of wall back into place. His face pale. "What the hell is that room?" he rasped. Claire's hands shook as she sealed the evidence bags. Not a room, a grave. That night, Claire spread the recovered items across her kitchen table. The shoe, the lunchbox, the notebook. She wore gloves, careful not to contaminate. Photographs, evidence tags, careful notes. But her mind kept circling back to carvings. It's inside the walls. Simon sat on the counter, tail flicking, eyes fixed on the dark hallway, his ears twitching. Claire looked over. The house was silent. Yet Simon's gazed in waver. Her phone buzzed. A new message. "You found their things, but you didn't find them." Her breath caught. The sender added another line. "Look closer at the notebook." Her eyes dropped to the spiral-bound relic. She flipped past the first pages. Math problems, doodles of flowers. Then, halfway through, she froze. A crude drawing covered the page. 5 stick figures holding hands. Behind them loomed a larger figure, drawn in thick, frantic strokes. Its head was too large. Its arms stretched wide, touching the children. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting. The man in the walls. Claire's blood turned to ice. Claire stared at the drawing long after midnight, the crude figure looming larger than its paper frame. The children's stick bodies looked fragile beside it, their smiles innocent lines of ink, cut her deeper than any crime scene she had worked. The notebook sat in an evidence bag now, sealed, but its image had already burned into her mind. Simon leapt down from the counter and padded silently into the hallway. His tail bushed, his ears pricked. He hissed at nothing, then disappeared into the bedroom. Claire forced herself to breathe evenly. She had learned long ago that fear fed on silence. She opened her laptop, pulling up the digitized archives of the Ravenwood Gazette. Search term, walls. Articles spooled onto the screen. 1961. Children whisper a man in the walls at Ravenwood Elementary. 1969. Custodian reports strange noises in sealed rooms. 1975. PDA confronts board about safety concerns. Rumors dismissed. Her heart thudded. The legend had roots older than the disappearances. She clicked the 1961 piece. A Halloween feature, written half seriously, half satirical. Kids claimed they heard scratching behind the chalkboards, footsteps in empty halls. Some said a man lived inside the walls, feeding on rats, waiting for strays. Adults laughed it off as childish fears. But in the margins of the scan, someone had handwritten a note in ink. Not a story. Keep them out of 6B. Claire leaned back. Who had written that? A teacher? A custodian? The next morning, she drove to the county library. Its local history section smelled of mildew and worn bindings. At the desk sat Mrs. Finch, the librarian who had worked there since Claire's own childhood. Her sharp eyes peered over her glasses. "Detective Whitfield," she said, her voice dry as parchment. "You're stirring up ghosts." Claire forced a polite smile. "I'm looking into the folklore of the school. Stories about the man in the walls." Mrs. Finch pursed her lips. "That tale is older than me. Started as a warning, I suppose. Teachers use it to scare children from wandering off. But stories have teeth when repeated long enough. Did anyone ever believe it was real?" Finch's gaze sharpened. Belief is a strange thing in a small town. Some swore they saw him. Others said it was nonsense. But everyone agreed. 6B was cursed. She shuffled to the back room, returning with a box labeled Oral Histories. Inside were cassette tapes, each marked with names and dates. She set one on the counter. Robert Hale, custodian, 1978. Claire's chest tightened. Hale again. She borrowed the old tape player and pressed play. The tape hissed. Then Hale's younger voice crackled through. "You hear things in the walls. Kids think it's funny, but I don't. Sounds like breathing sometimes. Sometimes laughter. I won't go near 6B at night. Not anymore." Claire shut the recorder off. Her skin crawled. By afternoon, she sat in McKinney's office. The sheriff read the transcript she'd typed from Hale's tape, his brow furrowed. "This is turning into a circus," he muttered. "Ghost stories, legends, drawings, and notebooks. You're asking me to put manpower on a folk tale." "I'm asking you to see a pattern," Claire countered. "The legend predates the disappearances. The children drew it. They carved warnings into walls. They weren't imagining it." McKinney leaned back, sighing. "And if it wasn't imagination, what then? A squatter? Some drifter living in the school? Maybe. Or someone using the legend to cover their crimes." He rubbed his jaw. "We'll pull old police files. See if anyone suspicious was ever questioned." Claire nodded. "And I want to re-examine the building plans. There's more behind those walls than just space." That evening, Claire spread the blueprints across her dining table. The school's original schematics dated to 1957. Thick black lines marking hallways and classrooms. Room 6B sat at the corner of the second floor. She traced the walls with her finger. On paper, it looked normal, but her eyes caught something odd. A maintenance corridor running parallel to 6B. It should have connected to the janitor's closet. Yet, in the revisions after the 1984 fire, that corridor was marked sealed. Why seal a corridor instead of repairing it? Her phone buzzed. A new text. Barrow sealed it. Not to keep something out, to keep something in. Claire's blood ran cold. She didn't reply. Instead, she pulled the notebook from her bag. She flipped to the back pages. More doodles filled the margins. Shapes like eyes, walls covered in lines, stick figures trapped inside boxes. At the very end, scrawled hastily in faded ink, "He promised we could go home if we stayed quiet." Her chest tightened. Promised? Who promised? A teacher? A janitor? Barrow? Or something else? 2 days later, she interviewed another former faculty member, Mr. Dennis Cole, once the music teacher. His home smelled of pipe smoke and varnish. "Do you remember the disappearances?" she asked. He chuckled bitterly. "This town never let me forget. Every parent wanted someone to blame. Did you ever hear The Man in the Walls?" Cole's eyes darkened. "Children's nonsense." "Is it? You taught them songs, didn't you? Did they ever sing about him?" His jaw tightened. "Mr. Cole," she pressed. "What did they sing?" He exhaled sharply. "A rhyme. I don't know where they learned it. Playground chatter. It went." He broke off, then shook his head. "I can't." "Please," Claire urged. Cole's voice was low, almost ashamed. "If you knock 3 times, he'll answer the call. If you speak his name, he'll come through the wall." Silence swallowed the room. Cole's hands trembled. "They sang it often that fall. I told them to stop, but children, they like to test boundaries. And then one day they were gone." Claire's stomach knotted. She left his house with the rhyme echoing in her head. That night, alone at her kitchen table, she tapped her knuckles against the wood once, twice, 3 times. Silence. She almost laughed at herself until Simon hissed from the hallway, his fur bristling. Claire froze. From inside the wall, faint as breath, came the sound of scratching. Claire stood in the empty classroom again, the boards across the windows straining against the wind. Dust motes drifted in her flashlight's beam, swirling like restless spirits. The rhyme still pulsed in her ears. "If you knock 3 times, he'll answer the call. If you speak his name, he'll come through the wall." She had spent the night replaying the sound of scratching in her own house. She told herself it was pipes, rodents, imagination, but Simon hadn't imagined it. The cat's hiss was real. Now she was back in room 6B, staring at the cut section Carl had made in plaster. She called over her shoulder. "You sure you're okay with this?" McKinney grumbled from the hall. "Not in the mood to crawl through a haunted school. But if you're going in, I'm not leaving you alone." Claire smirked despite the tension. "That's the spirit, Sheriff." They both ducked inside. The cavity yawned wider than she remembered. Their flashlights cut through blackness, revealing beams charred by the 1984 fire. The air was stale, tinged with soot and mildew. McKinney muttered, "Smells like a coffin." Claire's beam landed on the carvings again. "Let us out. We're still here." The letters seemed fresher than they should after 3 decades. "Kids could have done this before the fire," McKinney said, trying to sound rational. Claire shook her head. The notebook was here, the shoe, the lunchbox. They weren't just writing for fun. She crawled further, her knees scraping on old planks. The space narrowed, then widened again, and there, half buried in dust, something caught her light. A metal box. She tugged it free, coughing as a cloud of ash rose. The box was dented, scorched along one side. A padlock dangled, broken from a clasp. Inside were papers, yellowed, brittle. Claire lifted one carefully. It was a disciplinary record, handwritten, dated 1982. Student, Brian Carter. Incident, unauthorized exploration of maintenance corridor. Action, detention assigned. Warning issued. Notes, student claims he heard voices. Claire's stomach tightened. She flipped through more. Anna Martinez. Wandering halls near 6B. Claimed a man called her name. Molly Harper. Drew disturbing images of figures in the walls. Jacob Leland. Repeated rhyme during class. Disrupted others. McKinney leaned closer. All 5 kids. Targeted. Years before they vanished. She rifled further. At the bottom of the stack was a letter typed and signed. Mr. Barrow, you cannot continue ignoring staff concerns. The children are frightened for a reason. If the board insists on silence, you should at least consider sealing 6B permanently. Something dwells there. Something listens. McKinney swore under his breath. Not rumors, Claire whispered. Warnings. They carried the box out, dust streaking their clothes. Back in her office, Claire spread the papers across her desk. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above. She highlighted a name on each record. The pattern was unmistakable. The same 5 children, again and again, tied to the same classroom. Someone had been keeping files, watching them. Her phone buzzed. Another text. He liked the curious ones best. Her chest tightened. She typed fast. Who are you? The reply. You'll know when you hear him. Claire slammed the phone down, her pulse racing. That evening, she drove to the Martinez house again. Elena opened the door, her eyes heavy but sharp. You found something, she said at once. Claire nodded. Records. They show Anna was warned for being near 6B. Someone noticed her curiosity. All 5 children were documented. Elena's lips trembled. Then they knew. The school knew, and they let it happen. Do you remember Anna talking about a rhyme? Claire asked. Elena frowned. Yes. She sang it once at the dinner table. I told her never to repeat it. She said kids chanted it near the lockers. That if you knocked 3 times, the man on the walls would knock back. Her voice broke. She said she wanted to see if he was real. Claire's throat tightened. She believed it. She was 9, Elena whispered. Children believe in monsters because sometimes they know the world has them. Later, in her car outside, Claire replayed Hale's old tape. Sounds like breathing sometimes. Sometimes laughter. I won't go near 6B at night. Not anymore. The hair on her arms lifted. She pulled out the blueprints again. The sealed maintenance corridor ran alongside the classrooms, linking to the old boiler room. It wasn't just empty space. It was a passage, and someone could have used it. 2 days later, she convinced McKinney to let her explore further. They returned with a maintenance worker, flashlights, and masks. The boiler room was damp, the air thick with rust and mold. Pipes groaned faintly overhead. Against one wall, a brick section stood out. Newer mortar sealed it. This lines up with the sealed corridor, Claire said, shining her light. The worker ran his hand along the bricks. Not original. Looks like it was patched in a hurry. Different batch of mortar. Can you open it? Not without tools. Might take hours. Then start, McKinney said grimly. They set to work. The hammer blows echoed, dust filling the air. Piece by piece, the wall gave way. Finally, enough bricks fell to reveal an opening. A dark tunnel stretched beyond, narrow, claustrophobic. Claire's flashlight revealed scratches along the concrete, long, frantic. She stepped inside, her breath shallow. The tunnel bent left, leading upward. She followed, each step heavier than the last. Halfway in, her light caught something on the wall. Words scrawled in chalk. He's behind you. She spun, heart hammering. The tunnel was empty. Her radio crackled. McKinney's voice. Claire, you okay? She swallowed hard. Still here. Found writing. What's it say? She hesitated. Nothing helpful. At the tunnel's end, she emerged into a cavity above the classrooms. Old insulation sagged. Mice scattered in the beam of light. And there in the dust lay a blanket, small, patterned with faded stars. Claire knelt, her hand brushing over it gently. It was stiff, brittle, but recognizable. Anna's baby blanket. Her throat closed. Another object lay beside it. A rusted lunch pail. She opened it, revealing teeth marks etched along the rim, deep and irregular, as if gnawed in desperation. She staggered back, while rising. Her flashlight shook. On the far wall, words stretched jaggedly across the plaster, carved deep in the rest. The man is real. Her knees weakened. She radioed McKinney. We need this area sealed and documented. Now! As she climbed back down, her phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. A photo. taken in the very tunnel she had just crawled through. But in this photo, she wasn't alone. Behind her figure, blurred but undeniable, loomed another shape, tall, watching. The photo haunted her. It had been sent to her phone at 3:17 a.m., a grainy shot of the tunnel she had just explored. The beam of her flashlight illuminating plaster scars, and behind her, a blurred shape, too tall to be human, yet too defined to dismiss as a trick of light. Claire hadn't slept. She sat at her kitchen table with coffee gone cold, staring at the image. Simon paced the counters, tail lashing, pausing every few minutes to glare at the same corner of the room as though something lingered just out of sight. By dawn, Claire made herself a vow. She would not let shadows win. The sheriff's office smelled of burnt coffee and damp paper. McKinney sat with his reading glasses halfway down his nose, squinting at a spread of old personnel files Claire had dug up. "Let's start with the obvious," Claire said, pacing. Barrow, the principal. He had authority, keys, and direct orders from the board to silence staff. He kept the 6B key in his desk like a relic. He retires suddenly in '89 and dies 3 years later. Conveniently, before anyone pressed harder. McKinney leaned back. "You think he killed 5 children and walled them up in his own school?" "I think he knew something was in those walls," Claire said. "Whether he was part of it or just too afraid to fight it, I don't know yet." She pointed to another file. "Hale, the custodian. He admitted to hearing things. We know the children trusted him. Kids always confide in custodians. He had access to the crawl spaces and tunnels. And his oral history tape, he sounded terrified. But terror doesn't make you innocent." McKinney grunted. "He's dead, too. Died in '95. No chance to grill him." "Maybe not," Claire said. "But his son's alive. I checked." She slid a photo across the desk. "Reed Hale, mid-40s now, a mechanic in a neighboring county." McKinney raised an eyebrow. "And you want to pay him a visit?" Claire nodded. The garage reeked of oil and old tires. Reed Hale wiped his hands on a rag as Claire approached, his eyes narrowing at her badge. "I already told reporters years ago. I don't know anything about those kids," he said flatly. "I'm not a reporter," Claire said. "I'm investigating new evidence." "Your father worked at Ravenwood when they vanished." Reed's jaw clenched. "My father was a drunk. He heard things in the walls because he heard things everywhere. You want to drag his name through the mud again? Go ahead. He's in it deep enough already." Claire studied him. "Did he ever talk about 6B? Reed hesitated. "Only once. Said it wasn't safe. Told me if I ever went near that room, he'd tan my hide raw. I thought he was just trying to scare me straight. And now—" Claire pressed. Reed's eyes flicked away. "Now I think maybe he was scared himself. He stopped sleeping toward the end. Said voices whispered in the vents. Said something wanted him to open a door he'd sealed." Claire's chest tightened. "What door?" Reed shook his head. "Never said. Just the wrong one. That's what he called it. If I open the wrong one, they'll never stop." Claire leaned in. "They—" But Reed only dropped his rag and turned back to the half-dismantled engine. His silence was answer enough. That night, Claire returned to the station to dig deeper into Barrow's history. His personnel file was sanitized. Teacher evaluations, glowing board commendations. Nothing unusual, but buried in the county archives, she found something overlooked, a lawsuit filed in 1972, dismissed quietly. Parents of a child named Daniel Price had sued Ravenwood Elementary after their son disappeared for several hours inside the school. He was found in the basement, trembling, insisting a man had lured him into the walls. The case had been dropped after Barrow personally assured the court the boy was imaginative and prone to lying. Claire scribbled in her notebook. First warning, ignored. She met Elena Martinez again the next day. The mother's face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with need. "Do you think it was a teacher?" Elena asked, her voice low. "I think someone used the legend," Claire admitted. "Whether Barrow covered it or Hale enabled it, I don't know. But whoever or whatever was in those walls knew how to keep children quiet." Elena's eyes filled with tears. Anna trusted people too easily. If someone promised her answers, she would have followed. Claire reached across the table. I won't let this stay buried. Not again. That evening, back at her own house, Claire tried to unwind. She poured a glass of water, fed Simon, sat with the file spread across the couch. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. You're looking in the wrong place. He's not in the walls anymore. Claire's breath caught. She typed quickly. Then where is he? No reply. But from the kitchen, Simon hissed again, low, furious, his eyes fixed on the dark gap beneath the sink. Claire stood slowly, flashlight in hand. The beam sliced into the shadows. Nothing, just pipes and dust. And then 3 knocks from inside the wall. Her hand shook as she backed away. She grabbed her phone, dialing McKinney. Sheriff, she said, voice taut. It's not just a school. He's here. There was a long silence on the other end. Then McKinney's gravelly voice. Claire, listen to me carefully. Lock your doors. Don't answer knocks. And whatever you do... Static swallowed his words. The line went dead. Claire's screen flickered. A text appeared, unsent from her. Let me in. Her blood ran cold. Claire Whitfield had dealt with killers before. She had stood over crime scenes that smelled of copper and rot, watched suspects crack under interrogation lights, and stared grief-stricken parents in the eye. But nothing had ever hollowed her out the way the knocking did. It wasn't just noise. It was invitation. And every time she refused to answer, the silence after was worse than the sound itself, like holding her breath at the edge of drowning. She met McKinney in his office, a fresh stack of files between them. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. Barrow's financials were laundered through shell accounts, he said. We traced them back to a private donor, Harold Kess. Claire frowned. The contractor. He built the West Wing in '83. Yeah, and his crew reported odd jobs, extra masonry, sealing walls without explanation. Some of those men swore they were paid off the books. Claire tapped her pen. Kess funds Barrow. Barrow silences teachers. Hale hears voices but keeps his mouth shut, all while 5 children vanish. McKinney's gaze was grim, and Kess died in '94. Another one who can't answer questions. Convenient pattern, Claire muttered. McKinney leaned closer. But there's someone still alive who might. Harold Kess had a son, Charlie. Juvenile record, vandalism, trespassing. Arrested once for breaking into Ravenwood after it closed. Claire's pulse quickened. Where is he now? Off the grid, mostly. Drifts between construction jobs. But we got a last known address. They found him at a rundown trailer park on the outskirts of town. The place smelled of diesel and wet leaves. Dogs barked from rusted chains. Charlie Kess stepped out before they reached the door. Early 50s, thick-set, tattoos creeping up his arms. His eyes were sharp, hungry, the kind of gaze that sizes up every weakness. McKinney showed his badge. We need to ask about Ravenwood Elementary. Kess smirked. You're 30 years too late. 5 children never came home. Claire said evenly, you were there. You know what happened? He leaned against the porch rail, lighting a cigarette. I was there, sure. Everyone in that town was. But you're not asking the right question. Claire's stomach nodded. What's the right question? Kess blew smoke toward her face. Who let him out? The words sank into her like ice. McKinney bristled. You're talking about Barrow. Kess laughed. Barrow thought he was in control. None of us were. That thing was already in the walls before any of us picked up a hammer. Claire stepped closer. Then tell me who it was. His grin widened. You don't ask questions you don't want answers to, detective. They left empty-handed. McKinney muttered curses all the way back to town, but Claire barely heard. Kess's words looped in her mind. Who let him out? Not who put him there. That night, unable to rest, Claire returned to Ravenwood alone. The building creaked in the cold, boards rattling on the windows. She walked the halls with her flashlight, her breath fogging in the stale air. Room 6B pulled her like a magnet. Inside, she set her recorder on the desk, its red light blinking. My name is Detective Claire Whitfield. It's November 12th, 2022. 2:18 a.m. I am documenting whatever this is. She raised her knuckles, knocked 3 times on the wall. The sound echoed, then silence. She waited 30 seconds, a minute, then 3 knocks in reply. Her recorder caught her gasp. She whispered, "Who are you?" The air grew colder. Her breath curled white in front of her. A faint voice slithered through the wall, childlike, broken. We stayed quiet like he asked. Claire staggered back, flashlight beam jerking wildly. "Anna." The voice came again, thinner now, cracking. "Hungry. So hungry." The scratching began, dozens of hands clawing from the other side. Faster, louder, frantic. Claire fled, recorder clutched tight. Her heart beat a drum in her ears. She didn't stop until she reached her car. She locked the doors, breathing hard, staring at the black school looming behind her. Her phone buzzed. "A message," you asked. Now you can't unhear it. Another came instantly after. "He's not finished with you." The next morning, she played the recording in McKinney's office. He listened in silence, his jaw clenched. When the child's voice whispered, we stayed quiet like he asked. The sheriff's hand trembled against the desk. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Claire, shut it off. If those are real voices." McKinney cut her off. "Don't say it." "They're still there," she pressed. "Not alive, but not gone either. Which means whoever took them, whatever took them, never let go." The sheriff rubbed his face. "And you want to keep going?" Claire looked him dead in the eye. "I don't have a choice. He's here now, and if I don't find the truth, he won't stop." McKinney nodded slowly, defeated. "Then we find him." Claire whispered the words Kess had said, tasting dread as she spoke them aloud. "Who let him out?" That night, Claire returned home to find her front door ajar. Her hand flew to her weapon. She entered slowly, sweeping each room. The house was silent, except for Simon's low growl from the bedroom. She reached the hallway, stopped cold. On the wall, smeared in dust and soot, were words written by an unseen hand. "You already know my name." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A new message lit the screen. "Say it." The words on her bedroom wall seemed to pulse in the beam of her flashlight. "You already know my name." Claire stood frozen, breath shallow, her hand slick on the grip of her pistol. Simon hissed, tail bushed, pressing flat against the bed frame. Her phone buzzed again. The screen glowed with a single word. "Say it." She whispered into the empty air. "No." The light above her flickered. The drywall creaked, the studs inside straining like a body shifting in sleep. Claire fled the house. She didn't stop for shoes. Gravel cut her feet as she tore across the driveway and into her car. When she slammed the door, another message appeared. "If you won't, she will." Attached was a photo, Elena Martinez, taken from outside her living room window. At dawn, Claire hammered on Elena's door. The woman answered, pale and trembling. "I saw him," Elena whispered before Claire could speak. "Last night, standing in the hallway. He wore Jim's clothes, my husband's, but his face..." She shook her head violently. It wasn't human anymore. Claire clasped her shoulders. "Pack a bag. You're not staying here another night." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "What does he want from us?" Claire didn't answer, because she knew now. It wasn't Elena he wanted. It was her. McKinney met her at the station, grim as ever. "We ran down Kess again. He's disappeared." Trailer cleared out. Claire told him about the words on her wall, about the text, about Elena's sighting. McKinney listened without interruption, his jaw tight. When she finished, he said, "Only then we end this at Ravenwood." They returned that night, armed with flashlights, recording gear, and crowbars. The air was bitter, frost coating the grass around the school. They entered through the side door, boards groaning as they pried them loose. The halls felt smaller, heavier, as though the building had bent inward. Shadows swelled unnaturally at the corners. Claire led the way to the boiler room. The tunnel they had opened days earlier yawned black. McKinney muttered, "Every instinct says this is a mistake." "Every instinct says running won't help," Claire replied. They crawled inside. The tunnel seemed longer this time. The walls closed tighter. The scratches on the concrete more numerous, like thousands of hands had raked them raw. At last, they reached the cavity above the classrooms. Claire's light swept across the blanket, the lunch pail, the carved words. But something new gleamed there now. 5 small desks, dragged from the classrooms below, arranged in a neat row. Upon each sat a toy or trinket dusted in ash. Claire's stomach twisted. She recognized them from the photos in the case file. Anna's bracelet, Brian's baseball, Jacob's slingshot. Memorial, McKinney muttered. No, Claire whispered. Not memorial. Altar. The scratching began again, louder from every side. Then knocks. 3, 3, 3. McKinney raised his pistol. Where's it coming from? All around, Claire said hoarsely. The plaster behind the desks cracked. Dust spilled. Something pressed outward. Straining to break through, Claire raised the recorder. Her voice shook as she demanded, "What's your name?" Silence. Then, in a chorus of fractured children's voices, "He is a teacher." Claire staggered. "Barrow." The wall split wide. A figure stepped out. It wore a principal's suit, moth-eaten and gray. Its face was Barrow's, but hollowed, stretched thin, jaw unhinged too wide. The children's toys rattled as though moved by invisible hands. McKinney fired. The shots cracked like thunder in the tunnel, but the bullets vanished into dust before they struck. The thing's voice was layered. Barrow's tones beneath the higher, desperate wails of children. They knocked. I answered. And once you answer, you belong. Claire forced her voice steady. Where are they? The thing smiled, its teeth too many. In me. With me. Always. The air turned frigid. Claire's breath smoked. She felt hands clutching at her ankles, tugging her down. McKinney grabbed her arm, hauling her upright. Move. They scrambled back into the tunnel, the figure following, its limbs stretching unnaturally, scraping along the walls. Claire's flashlight flickered. For a moment, the beam caught 5 small faces behind the thing's shoulders. Children's eyes pleading, lips forming silent words. Anna, Jacob, Molly, Brian, Ruth. Her chest shattered. We can't outrun it, she gasped. Then what? McKinney demanded. Her recorder beeped. Still running. The red light blinked. She remembered the whisper. Say it. Claire turned, throat raw. She shouted into the dark. Barrow! The figure froze. The tunnel shook. She screamed louder. Thomas Barrow! The walls trembled violently. Dust cascaded. The figure shrieked, a sound splitting between human rage and children's cries. Claire pressed on. I name you, I see you, and I release them. The recorder's light blinked faster. The air tore with sound, knocks, wails, breaking plaster, and then silence. When the dust cleared, the figure was gone. The desks lay empty. Only the children's trinkets remained, scattered in the rubble. Hours later, dawn broke over Ravenwood. Paramedics checked them at the site. Neither could explain the collapse of the old boiler room, or why the desks had appeared where no one had seen them before. But Claire knew. As the sun rose, her phone buzzed one last time. A message, thank you. Attached was a blurry photo. 5 children holding hands, their faces calm, walking away into light. The town of Ravenwood did not speak openly of the 5 missing children anymore. Not after the discovery at the old school, not after the fire that gutted the West Wing weeks later, leaving only a charred skeleton of brick and steel. The official report listed structural decay and vandalism as the cause. No one mentioned the desks, the trinkets, or the voices that had filled the tunnels. But the mothers remembered. Elena Martinez kept Anna's bracelet in a glass case on her mantel. Brian's parents left his baseball on the porch, rain-worn and cracked. Jacob's slingshot sat on a shelf above his brother's desk. Molly's doll was buried beside her mother's grave, and Claire Whitfield carried all of them with her every day. She left the sheriff's office not long after. McKinney had offered her a deputy's badge, but she turned it down. She couldn't sit under fluorescent lights with cold cases stacked around her. She couldn't explain what had happened in words fit for reports. Instead, she wrote page after page, nights spent at her kitchen table, Simon curled against her elbow. Not a novel, not an article, just testimony, so that when her mind faltered, when the memories blurred, she would remember exactly what she had heard in those walls. We stayed quiet like he asked. Hungry, so hungry. He is the teacher. Sometimes she still woke to the sound of knocking. 3 measured beats, distant like a memory bleeding through. She never answered, but Simon always hissed, always glared at the same corner of the kitchen wall. One evening, months after the fire, Claire drove past the ruins of Ravenwood Elementary. Children no longer played near it. Parents steered them away. But flowers still appeared at the fence line, fresh ones every week. No one admitted who left them. Claire parked and stood at the chain-link barrier, the winter air sharp in her lungs. The ash smelled faintly sweet, like charred paper. She whispered into the wind, "I named you. You're finished." The silence that followed was deep, final. And yet, when she turned back to her car, a scrap of lined paper fluttered against the fence, caught on rusted wire. She pulled it free. Child handwriting, faint pencil marks. Knocked 3 times. If he knocks back, don't answer. Claire folded it carefully, tucked it into her coat pocket. She drove away without looking back. In her dreams, the children sometimes returned, not as phantoms, but as themselves, laughing, running through open fields, free at last. She would call out, and they would turn, wave, smile. And in those dreams, there was no school, no walls, no shadows, just light. Claire prayed those were their truths now. And when she woke in the dark, heart pounding, she told herself the silence in her house was proof enough. But still, every so often, she left the recorder running on her nightstand, just in case.